So small group tonight, so I guess we can kind of have more of an intimate conversation about it. So if you don't know me, I'm Paul Hopkins. I'm the assessor here. So I have 25 years experience doing assessment and revaluations for different communities, different organizations. So um, uh, much experience doing this over the years. So I did on the handout, you'll see there's the question and answer that we're kind of going to go directly through. But feel free to ask any questions that pop into your mind as we're going through. Don't bother waiting or holding them to the end. We'll just do them as they come. So the first thing is, what is a revaluation? And the definition is the process of performing a market analysis for all properties within a municipality to determine accurate and equitable values. But really what we're doing is we're just setting the most likely sales price for every property in town. So we'll be using the sales that happen leading up to our October 2024 assessment date, and comparing those sales to each property in town and using each metric, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, to compare to every other house in town that hasn't sold, and using those sales to derive what we would feel would be the most likely selling price, similar to an independent appraisal that you would hire someone to go and do. The number 2, I put it there because it's the biggest question that everybody asks. Will the revaluation increase my taxes? And the general answer is the revaluation doesn't change the budgetary needs of the town, but it may change your taxes. So what it means is if the average tax increase for residential properties is up 20% and you increased it 30%, you may see a greater burden of the overall budgetary needs. Whereas if yours only went up 10%, you may see less of a burden of that town financial needs. So the reval may shift slightly what your taxes are because market changes differently throughout the community. But it won't change the budgetary needs or the amount of money that the town needs to collect to cover its expenses. What is the fair market value? The fair market value is the most probable price property should bring in a competitive and open market. So what that means is the fair market value is the price that if you put your house on the market for with a real estate agent and market it as such, the most likely selling price. And again, that's what our goal is to determine while we're doing this revaluation. And we'll be looking at many factors that happen for each individual sale. So we'll be looking at not only location, topography, the utilities, the zone, lot size, but we'll be detailing out each parcel. We'll be segregating each parcel into its details, square footage, quality of construction, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and we'll be pricing each piece accordingly. So if we determine that one bathroom is standard and a second bathroom, we notice through our sales adds an additional $3,000 to the sales price, we will price our second bathrooms accordingly, and so on. A good thing that everybody asks about is how will I know my value is equitable? So as part of the handout group, I provided a listing of sales that have happened in the community. They haven't been filtered, so it's raw data. But what you can do is during the time of the revaluation, our final numbers, you can go through the list of final sales, and through that, you can kind of find houses that are similar to yours or in your neighborhood. And you can use those listings to see if your house matches up to the sales that are happening. Something else that you can do, you can compare your property to your neighbors. So we'll have property cards available. So you could print yours, print neighbors that have similar homes, and compare and contrast your home to their home to see if you feel that they are similar and in line with what they need to be. So if you find that yours is higher in the neighborhood than some of the other neighbors, bring it to our attention and we can address that. Will my property change value? Typically during a revaluation, yes. In the current market that we are seeing, most definitely. So we are right now in a stable peak market. So our last revaluation was 2019. So the value we have on everybody's home currently was derived from values we marketed in 2019. So in the last 5 years, we have seen drastic changes in the market in Thompson relative to sales prices. So what will happen during this process is those 2019 assessments will go away. So those basically get vacated. And in place of those, we will use the new sales and apply a new valuation method using those sales to create a new assessment. So the old assessment from 2019 will have no bearing on what the new assessments that are generated for this 2024 revaluation will have.
Excuse me, do you think the 2019 data might be bad or faulty or anything? I know it's different markets, but it's really where you're focusing on the change in the market. But do you think the 2019?
So the revaluation was done by Vision Appraisal, and our previous assessor, both I think are professional and did their best with the data. I wasn't involved in that, so I can't say whether or not the data is faulty. We've had a lot of changes in the last few years. One thing being the new zoning regulations. So what will happen is not only will we be updating market values per the new market data, but we'll be updating our zoning regulations to match the new our assessments to match the new zoning regulations. So our assessments will take into account the new zoning changes when we're doing our market value. But back to your point, Vision and Diana did their best, and I'm sure they met the state required prerequisites to file their revaluation statistics with OPM. So I would imagine that it wasn't faulty. But as with everything, 5 years is a long period of time. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So can you just briefly summarize the zoning changes that will impact this?
So for instance, we had a large area of town that was an R80 zone. So that meant you needed 80,000 square feet to have a building lot. Most of that area has been converted into our RRAD district, which now only requires 40,000 square feet. So what we use that for is the primary building lot size. So the intrinsic value in any lot is its buildability. So whereas in the R80 zone, we needed basically 1.84 acres to value for a building lot, we now only will be needing 0.92 acres for a building lot. There are some additional things that go into that we'll be implementing in this revaluation. For instance, we'll be adding a component to the valuation of the ability to subdivide. So there's really no value put into the system right now that says there's increased value for the potential for a lot split or subdivision in our current methodology of valuing land. That will be something that we investigate while we're doing the next revaluation to see if not only is it just simply a buildable lot, but is there potential value in the ability to subdivide or create secondary lots. So as part of that zoning change, those are things that we're now going to be investigating and valuing accordingly with those new changes. Similarly, a lot of the district around the lakes have changed size, so you don't need as much land area to build. So lots that previously were unbuildable as part of the last zoning rules may now be buildable. So if that's the case, we'll be notifying people that their value will go from non-buildable valuations to buildable, which will drastically change.
But that's based on potential, right?
Correct. So let's say a building lot is worth 50,000 and you have 0.92 acres. I'm not saying that 1.84 acres is now going to be worth $100,000. But there is value in the potential for subdivision, as we see going on all across town. And we see a lot of developers buying up land that can be split or subdivided because of the potential of what they can now develop there. So those are factors that we will be addressing during the next
Is
process.
there, a way to get a copy of this new revised zoning thing?
Yep. So I know that I have a copy, zoning, planning. It all is readily available. I think it's on our website too.
Correct. It's all linked together with the code of ordinances now as well.
Yeah. So that's all publicly available. So you can see, and on our current street cards, we have both the the previous zoning label and the new zoning. So any parcel that's street card that's printed you'll be able to determine what it was and what it is.
It's already there now on the card.
It's on the card now, yes. Yep. So, and that could be printed off for any of them, because each parcel now has the old and the new. So number 6, how will the assessor obtain the most accurate information on properties? So one of the things that we've just done is we mailed the data questionnaire across town. So every residential parcel, 1 to 4 family in the entire community has been sent a data mailer. Those were due back by January 1st. What we're doing is we are going to review each data mailer that comes through, compare it to what is in our current database, make necessary adjustments or callbacks on those as needed. For any parcel that has not sent back their data mailer, we will schedule times to go out and have a physical inspection done for each one of those individual parcels. So we'll be using both methods to make sure that the information that we have in our system that we're going to be using to value property is as accurate as possible. In the event that someone didn't return their questionnaire and rejects a physical inspection on their home, we will do our best to estimate from the knowledge that we have what aspects and assets they do have in those homes. But those are mainly the 2 methods. A third method is always neighbors giving us information as well. We also use our online methods also. So one of the things that we have access now to is a lot of MLS data. So anytime a house gets put on the market or is marketed for sale, we review all of those to see if what's being marketed is the same as we have in our database. Which leads us to 7. Am I required to allow the assessor into my home? You are not required. But again, if you don't return your questionnaire and you reject a physical inspection of your property, we have to then use other means and other tools available to us to estimate what the condition and quality of the home is. So even though it may be uncomfortable, it is in the best interest of our property owners to allow the assessor to do the necessary inspections. So we are valuing it specifically as to what assets the properties do have. This one will be an interesting one. I live on the water. Will I be unfairly valued? And the question is definitively no. However, we are seeing that the value of our waterfront properties are escalating at a rate far beyond the values of other properties around town. So what will happen is you may have a 1,500 square foot cape on the water, and you compare it to a 1,500 square foot cape in town, you may notice that your assessment is significantly higher than the property in town. And the reason for that will be the market conditions are going to tell us that the value of your property is significantly higher because properties on the waterfront are selling for a significantly higher number. So we will have information to back up whatever assessments we do set. But it's not that the property that people that live on the water will be unfairly singled out. But they will be fairly assessed according to the sales that are happening in the market. When will I be notified of the new valuation? The new valuation will be mailed to every property owner around October 31st of 2024. So it may be a little before, maybe a little after that date, but that's our target goal. And what it will do is it'll provide you the value of your property prior to the revaluation, and once the revaluation is complete, that revaluation number. So you can see what yours was and what it's going to be. If I disagree with the new assessment, what are my options? So if you believe that the assessor has unfairly valued your property, the first step will be to contact us. See if there's something that we erred on that maybe we didn't have correct in our property data, and see if we can resolve that. We'll do our best to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible. But after meeting with the assessor's office, nothing's changed. There'll be an informal hearing process with the revaluation company, which is Municipal Valuations. And that'll happen in the month of December of 2024. And what they will do is they will also hear any questions or concerns that the public has. They'll gather all the information and any change that they are going to recommend and bring it to my attention. And we'll make a final determination. So what if the assessor and the company make no changes to my value? The next step would be to join or go before our Board of Assessment Appeals. You would have to apply to the Board of Assessment Appeals, and that process will start February 1st and it will end on February 20th. So you'll have to make an application in the assessor's office to meet with that board. Their meetings will start in March, the month of March, and they will meet with every individual. So the board is a 3-member group of residents who can make their own determination and override any assessment determined by the assessor. So you go through that process, you present your information to the board, and they make no change. Your next and final valuation contested method would be to go to the Superior Court of Connecticut. Hopefully we can resolve anybody's questions. Neither the town nor residents, I'm sure, want to go through that expense. So we'll do our best to make sure that everything is fair and equitable by the end of the revaluation process. Question 3 or question 13 basically just goes over how your taxes are determined, and it talks about the grand list relative to the grand levy. And there's an example there that shows the grand levy is the amount of taxes that are needed to collect by a town in order to cover their expenses. The grand list, and if there's an increase to the grand list, what would happen to the mill rate? So what generally happens as the mill rate or the grand list, the amount of value of property in the town goes up, the mill rate generally goes down to compensate, which is what I believe will happen during this process. So we are at 26 mills now. If we saw a 50% growth to the grand list, you would see a relative 50% decline to the mill rate to compensate for that increased grand list growth. What the final numbers are, we're at the very beginning of the revaluation process, so I don't have those readily available, but we will have those most likely by the end of summer. that's really the presentation. Are there any further questions? So part of the handout is just the presentation, the sales that have happened for the last few years in town, and a copy of the revaluation statute, so that's available. If you have any questions, I'm available every day that the building is open generally, so feel free at any time to call or stop by, and we can go over any of that information as necessary.
So I noticed in the title of this, it says treatment of certain Indian properties,
Mhm.
lands. Is that a mistake?
Nope,
Oh,
so
quite formal.
it is
It's
not. So this also goes over, we do have two recognized Indian tribes here in the state, so there are specific rules and regulations that do pertain to those communities, so so this statute that goes over the revaluation of general land in Connecticut also talks about basically that those are excluded. So the towns don't revalue tribal land.
So this is kind of a summary or I shouldn't say summary, more detailed, I guess, of this whole process we're going through.
So it's not a detail of the process. So the process is determined by the assessor and the revaluation company working in tandem to get the numbers and the assessments. That's the laws that pertain to what the towns are required to do as part of this mandated revaluation. So basically that goes over that it's mandated, what the schedule is for towns to conduct their revaluation, and some of the methods that they are allowed to use in valuing property. So in that statute, it does allow for towns to send the questionnaire. Prior to that being put into that statute, questionnaires were not allowed. So we did have to physically inspect each and every property. Relatively speaking, it costs the town pennies to send out a questionnaire to get the information, whereas depending on your community, and it's more in a rural community because there's more distance between parcels, and there's a lot more travel involved. So the price to do an inspection on a residential home in a typical revaluation contract, we could probably expect something like $35 per parcel. So by doing the questionnaire, we're saving the town significant amount of money, which is present. So the revaluation cost for this revaluation is about $60,000. Whereas the one that was in 2019, I think was $168,000. So we're trying to save the town as much money as possible.
So an assessor won't be visiting properties unless the questionnaire is not filled out.
Either it's not filled out and returned, or if we have significant changes that we just need to follow up with. And what we'll be doing is once the physical inspection schedule is set, we'll start posting on our assessor's page the areas that we'll be in and what days we'll be where. So the public will know, we'll be out and about.
In the past, revaluations are usually half of the properties, but this one is like all of the properties. Is that an advantage for getting a better value, a better assessment?
So I would say yes, in that we're getting the most accurate information for every property in town. So as part of the last revaluation contract, towns here in the Northeast, what the schedule was the revaluation company would do half the town by physical inspection. And then 5 years later, they would do the next half of the town. I find that that's an inefficient way of conducting the reval, because really you're only getting the most accurate information on half your town. So half your town could be completely false. So although it's going to be much more effort on the assessor's office and specifically the assessor's clerk. I think we'll get a lot better results by conducting the reval as a whole community as opposed to just half.
And the value of the house versus the assessed value, what the sale value or the?
So the market value of the house would be the most likely selling price. In Connecticut, we only tax on 70% of that
70%.
value. So so if your house was after the reval was valued, marketed value was $100,000, you would only be taxed on $70,000.
70,000 times whatever the mill rate is at that particular.
Correct, and that would be your tax.
You're saying that the mill rate's gonna be adjusted as well as the reassessment of the houses, or properties rather?
Maybe.
I'm saying theoretically, that's the process. However, it's the Board of Finance that determines the mill rate. So that would be up for debate during the budgeting process. So,
And that won't be this budgeting season, it'll be next year's budget.
correct. So,
When we take that into consideration.
right. So it won't be the 2024 process, 2025 process.
Question for selectmen. The process of the budgeting, people are able to go and sit on all those meetings, correct?
Correct. We begin February 8th. All the meetings will be Zoom, but will also be in person here at the Senego. But February 8th is the slated first budget workshop. 6 p.m.
So, the new valuation and the new mill rate will come at the same time? Or will they be offset based on the budgeting season?
Right, so the assessment date that we'll be working off of is October 1st of 2024.
Right.
So the February through May process for the budget of 2025 will calculate the mill rate, which will then determine your tax for July 1st, 2025. So the reval numbers will be done October 1st, 2024. The budget process in the early 2025 will be to set the mill rate for that new valuation, which would then again be billed July of 2025.
The budgeting workshops will be also Zoom for people to watch at home.
Yes.
Do you envision more of these meetings on this?
I'm gonna say probably not, since
Yeah, I mean, this kind of seems a lot of what I saw last time, so it's not
Right.
much different, so.
right, you're right. These were meant for more of a question and answer, so that way the public could attend and kind of get information and answer questions as opposed to, hearing maybe not quite truths from their neighbors and friends and, social media. So we put these out there to give people the opportunity to come and get some actual facts as opposed to, second party half truths.
So, this rezoning change, you give me a time frame or something when I talk to them as to exactly what changed and when, or name of
That goes back to 2020.
Yeah,
2020.
yeah,
2020, and they've made a few modifications every year since then. But yeah, they've been actively working for the last 4 years almost.
And the gal's name in here, I think.
We have Tara Pengesek.
Tara, that's.
Yeah, that's our Director of Planning and Development, and Cindy Dunn, our
Oh,
zoning
Cindy, yeah,
enforcement.
no, Cindy.
But the entire zoning regulations are online. They can look at everything.
Correct.
mhm. Right, so if you have questions about where you think your, lot price may go, you could always print off your card, check the online zoning regulations, and then, come in and we can discuss it.
Just seems odd, speculating on potential. I don't know.
So it's not a speculation because we can validate the price change. So we know developers have bought land with the intention to develop. So we can use that to.
Maybe you should charge the developer, not the. No, no.
But you can always sell to the developer and they could realize that profit, so.
What if you plan never to do that? Then you kinda, I know, I'm
So-
not asking you to answer that question, I'm just. It just seems odd.
And it is one of those complex, and it is, so the numbers of this, the potential for a development is not so it's not a frighteningly large number. So right now, our excess land value is at $1,900 an acre. I can't envision that number growing very much from where it is. Although our property values are escalating, our house values are escalating at a huge price, our actual land values is not changing very much. So the land values that we see, the vacant land sales that we see, are pretty stable and have been pretty stable over the last 5 years. It's constructed homes and is where the real value has escalated.
It seems to like, maybe it's the other way down a little bit now. I know it really peaked about 6 months ago. And it seems like things since the interest rate has gone up, things have kind of flatlined a little bit.
We're at the stable part of the peak market is what I call it.
Right.
So what we're seeing is that the prices, there's no longer huge bidding wars for properties. I mean, a house would have been on the market for a day and had, if it was offered up at 350, there would have been 6 bids and yeah, it would have sold for 375 to 400.
Prices have stabilized a bit, it's kind of flattened out. So
Right.
it's not like you're seeing a considerable increase. I know I have some other property and they send me a market analysis every month that tells me how much the property is increasing in value, and it was going up 12%, 14% a year, and it was down 2.2% this past year, or this past month. So on a monthly scale, it does
Yeah.
appreciate sometimes a little bit.
Right, and you're in that peak while things were climbing the last 2 years, in a hot market in the past, I've seen houses increasing at 1.5% a month. During the peak of this economy, we were near 4. I mean, it was escalating at a unrealistic number. Thankfully, the numbers have now kind of stabilized and we're back to a normal growth pattern, but we're still at that high plateau area.
Which is actually a good thing because the revaluation didn't take place at the highest point, so
Right.
it's gonna make things a little bit softer, maybe.
Yes, maybe. And part of the problem is in our 2009 revaluation, that was really the beginning. So we would have analyzed sales for that one in the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. So we really hadn't hit that, afterburner market where things had taken off. So where our values are now are significantly lower because the point after our last reval is where really the things kind of took off. So somebody that may see, a fairly substantial increase in their assessment when they get their notice, they have to compare that, and we'll publicize what the average increase is. So that way, people aren't having a heart attack about what their new assessment is. Because if everybody went up 40%, then that means everything's the same when it comes to taxes.
That's really relative to the mean, right?
Right. So the further you get from the mean or the median, the greater your burden or lesser your burden may be. So like I said, if the average is 20%, the further you get away from that, either plus or minus will have a plus or minus impact to what your tax burden is.
So is it mean or median?
So we use both, but typically,
It's like that.
and it depends on which mathematical equation we're determining. But typically we use the median. The reason being is the median, you take out a lot of the outliers, whereas in the mean or the average,
Yeah.
all those outliers are included, which may skew the numbers. But if you're just taking the midpoint, the center number,
Right.
and using that for your statistical analysis, it gives a more realistic image of what what's happening. So we use them both, but generally speaking, the median is the one that we give the more weight to.
Just curious, what's an outlier? I mean, I know what an outlier is. What do you consider to be an outlier where you kick it out?
Well, so in the sales, so if you look at the handout, you'll notice that this is just raw
I think
sales.
we had this discussion before about property versus, yeah, I know.
But part of that is we'll look at these and maybe we find out that it's an estate sale. So
Right.
the rate of change is only 2% at the sales price. Well, it's because the estate, maybe somebody passed away and they're just
Yeah.
looking to unload the property, so.
Return.
So we'll be looking at those when we finally select all the sales that we'll be using as part of our analysis. And it could just be, and it happens in the market. It happens if you buy stocks or invest in the market. Sometimes you just hit something at the right time and you get a good deal.
Right.
And we don't exclude sales that somebody just got a good deal. Just like we don't exclude sales that somebody fell in love with the property and paid an extra
Right.
8% because they loved it. So, so we only exclude sales that we really can find definitive information that they're not valid.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Like I said, I'm here almost every day. If the building's open, I'm usually here, so if there's any questions, always feel free to stop in. We can go over it.
Maybe I'll call you October 1st.
I would prefer not, but it may be busy that day, just